On behalf of Fundación Educativa Carlos M. Castañeda, I welcome you to History in the Making. We wish to express our thanks to the University of Miami School of Communication for hosting this exhibition. I would also like to thank the panelists, Rissig Licha, Candace, Barbot, and Patrick Farrell, as well as my old friend Gary Williams for being here with us today. And also, I want to thank you. A word about Fundación Educativa Carlos M. Castañeda. The foundation is dedicated to honoring the memory of Cuban journalist Carlos Castañeda by promoting the principles that guided his life: excellence in Spanish language journalism, freedom of the press, and human rights. It supports a graduate journalism scholarship program for Spanish-speaking students, publishes books, and organizes forums and conferences of special interest to the community, as well as cultural events like this one. Cuban journalist Carlos Castañeda had a passion for journalism at an early age. In Havana, he worked for several newspapers and magazines, TV and radio. At 28, he fled Cuba in pursuit of freedom of expression. And once in New York, he was one of the founders of Bohemia Libre magazine, and later joined Life en Español, where he became assistant editor in 1970. He learned a lot about photography there. Castañeda created, designed, and edited El Nuevo Día in San Juan, Puerto Rico, setting a new course for journalism. El Nuevo Día was recognized as one of the most successful dailies in Latin America, thanks to his innovative ideas. In 1999, Carlos transformed the image of El Nuevo Herald, right here in Miami, turning it into the most profitable newspaper in the night reader chain. Throughout his career, he was editorial and design consultant to more than 20 major newspapers and magazines in Latin America. He also delivered conferences and seminars at universities in several countries. He died in 2002, but his legacy of excellence, passion, and dedication is imprinted in the minds and the souls of the journalists who call him El Maestro. The foundation published the book Ser Periodista, La Vida y Legado de Carlos M. Castañeda, right there, which contains his ideas about journalism. It includes transcripts of his talks, revealing the secrets of achieving excellence in the craft. You know some of those secrets. Some of his own writings have been included as an example of his work. Additionally, his colleagues offer us a vision of their years working in the newsroom next to Castañeda. We have several copies of the book right here. Gary Williams, which you already know, started working as a staff photographer for El Nuevo Día in San Juan in 1970, marking the beginning of a 50-year career in photojournalism. His work has been published around the world in newspapers, magazines, books, and in the internet. Gary won several national and international awards for his photography, including the King of Spain Award for News Photography for the multi-frame sequence of photos showing circus superstar Carl Gualenda as he fell to his death. These photos are displayed in the exhibition, and some of you already saw them. Gary was also runner-up 3 times for the Pulitzer Prize. Along with his job as staff photographer for El Nuevo Día, Gary was also the Caribbean photo stringer for the Associated Press for 20 years. In 1990, he led the revolutionary change to digital photography in El Nuevo Día, which was instrumental in achieving full digitalization of the newspaper. The panel discussion, which will be moderated by Rissig Licha, who is president of 360 Strategy Mix, a strategic communications consultancy firm. Rissig has worn many hats in the communications field, but as a young journalist, he worked with Carlos Castañeda and Gary Williams in El Nuevo Día, and I know he has a lot of stories to say, in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He's joined by photographer Candace, Barbot, Francis L. Wolfson, Chair in Communication in the Professor of Professional Practice at the School of Communication, and Patrick Farrell, Miami Herald photographer, who is a lecturer at the School of Communication. Rissig, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm glad you had the opportunity to go through the hallways and take a look at some of the photographs that Gary is responsible for, and had the entertaining chat just previous to this panel on a few of those other photographs that were not there. I think to do justice to the discussion, we need to put this in the proper context. When all this was going on, it was a different world altogether. There were no selfies, there were no social media opportunities for everybody who has a phone to print any graphic story they wanted to print. Just to give you a small detail, when I first started, and I was only a journalist for a few years, and I went into more profitable careers. But at the time, I was sports editor for El Nuevo Día, and we had to cover, I think Gary went on that assignment to the Dominican Republic for the Central American Games in 1973. At that point in time, there was no digital photography. We had to ship our film rolls back to Puerto Rico every day for them to be developed in San Juan so they could appear in the paper. So, you know, it was not instant gratification of getting your work published or getting your story out. And I think in the context of this discussion, it is only just to mention the fact that we all work for a person who was a genius in recognizing very early on, when television was king, that newspapers had to stop being gray. Newspapers had to tell the story in more graphic terms. And believe me when I tell you, I have worked with a lot of people in communications, but not that many who had the distinct knowledge and the distinct instinct to use photography in the way Carlos Castañeda did at El Nuevo Día. He changed the whole nature of journalism on the island at that point in time, and took a very provincial newspaper from a secondary town, even though the people that come from there want you to believe that Ponce is the capital of Puerto Rico, and brought it to San Juan and had it become the largest circulation paper in Puerto Rico, a paper that controlled at some point in time, no longer true, but at some point in time, 70% of all advertising that was sold on the island, including television. So that was the success of that newspaper. I'm not going to bore you with any more stories, but I think it would be of some good to us to have Candace and Patrick run us through what the transition has been in journalism and in photography in terms of from the analog world to the digital world we're in today. Candace?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the people who just arrived. I too started when there was film. Pat and I both started about the same year, I think.
Yeah.
And it was film. It was, 36 frames on a roll of film, and or 20, and if you were at a poor newspaper, you rolled it yourself.
So it was never the same.
So when all of us started, you used to go in the dark, completely dark, with these little canisters, and you'd actually roll film into the canisters by hand, and then put a little top on it, and then tape the top, because if you dropped it and the top popped off, all your pictures would get exposed, it would happen in your haste.
Every now and then.
And, you had to be really selective. I mean, you didn't just blast through a bunch of photographs because you had 36 and then you'd have to stop and open the camera, well, rewind by hand, not by motor drive, but rewind by hand. Well, not until the 80s you didn't have one.
You're getting ahead of the
You're
story.
getting ahead of the story. And then take it out and put another, by that time, the image could have changed. What you were there to capture could have changed dramatically in changing a roll of film. So you were much more selective about what you covered. And so I think that in itself was the process of being a storyteller and of capturing it in analog made you think through things a lot more carefully. And then you didn't have anything to look at on the back of the camera. So one of the things that I found really changed for me as a photographer was when we went to digital, it was great because now I don't have to change rolls of film, but I got lazier because before I could see what I had to guess what I had, and I would stay longer and I'd work the situation much harder. Now, when I went to digital, they called it chimping. You know, you'd look at the back and you go, that's good enough, I can go. You know, but when you didn't know if it was good enough, you would stay, and you'd stay, and you'd stay, and you'd stay. And that's, I think, one of the things I regretted was, you know, of course, your editor could call and say, you got it yet? And you could say, I don't know.
Deadline.
I don't know. I need to stay a little longer, you know? But now, you know, they'd say, well, you know, you can look at the back of the camera and tell if you have it or not. But that didn't used to tell you if it was in focus in the beginning days.
You could get an idea.
Zooming came later. But I think that it really changed the way I behaved as a storyteller in that I think I just really was sharper in a lot of ways. I really paid attention more when I couldn't see what I had because I was so afraid of being outshot. And then if someone like Gary showed up and he was the competition, you know, the gloves were off. I had to stay and I had to outshoot it because you'd have two newspapers putting out the same story and yours needed to be better. And so if you were doing analog, that was really tough. I think there was a misunderstanding about what digital was going to do, and I think the misunderstanding is that digital was going to make our lives easier, and I have not found that to be true. I think that now we have a whole different set of problems.
It's faster.
It's faster, but it's not easier.
It's not easier.
So, you know, I got caught up in making the transition and helping the newspaper at the Miami Herald transition into digital. A lot of training and a lot of rethinking, but I think it did change the way I approached my stories. That was one of the
Patrick, how did digital change you?
Well, the other night, I covered a local election, and within 5 minutes, I was sitting in the front seat of my car transmitting a picture.
Yeah.
And years ago, if you shot film and if you were abroad and the picture needed to be in the newspaper the next day, you would run to the airport with a bag of film and tap on somebody's shoulder that was getting on a plane to Miami and ask them to carry the film to Miami, and you would contact somebody at the Miami Herald and say, meet so-and-so at the airport, they're going to have my film. And that's how, so it's easier in that respect.
Sometimes they got lost.
Yeah, or sometimes you pick the wrong person. Or
I'd usually give it to a pilot. I'd give it to a pilot.
Yeah.
They always got lost.
Yeah.
Sometimes they got through.
Yeah.
Then transmitters, that was the big difference.
Transmitters, and
Did
then when you use transmitters, you would, because it was still a timing issue, you would transmit a wet picture, because as soon as you got it out of the fixer or the water, you would put it on the transmitter and roll it, and it'd be a wet picture because of the timing. And then eventually, we had this machine called a Leafax, which you would take. You didn't have to make a print anymore, and you just put the negative into this machine and scan it onto a little screen about the size of what's on the back of your cameras now.
Yeah, right.
and send that.
Right, a caption.
So digital's made it easier. We're in a much more visual time. And everybody is seeing still images, in real time all the time. So I think we're more visual. I'm not sure visual literacy is at the level that it was back when we were more diligent about picking images and presenting them. Now there's a lot of presentation and we're not exactly sure. So.
Gary, well, how about you?
Well, I was going to say the beginning of the end was digital photography for a lot of photographers, a lot of newspapers, because I remember when I was in Tucson, I'm watching the Scully landing on the Hudson River, and all of a sudden all these ferry boats showed up, and everybody was sitting on the top of deck. I could see it from the video feed. All these people were taking iPhone pictures and they were sending them to CNN, ABC, which made us obsolete. And that's where we are now. We're basically obsolete, although it still takes a trained person to follow a story. An amateur with an iPhone can come on a situation and capture an image that I might capture if I was there, or I might not. But it's when you have, there must have been 250 people on all these ferry boats taking all these pictures. So I realized then that this was the beginning of the end for photojournalism. I don't know. I see good things happening on the internet, but you still see a lot of pictures that are being picked that are not the best pictures. More to your point.
Well, I don't think the fact that we have pictures necessarily makes what we get much better. I think pictures tell a story, but to a large degree, what newspapers have somewhat lost track of is the fact that content cannot be just thrown into a page and expect people to have the same response that they used to have with their old newspaper. I think we have strayed away from good content. We become sloppy because we need to put things out faster, not only graphically, but also from an editorial point of view. And therefore, the whole product has suffered as such. Yes, we have access to a lot more pictures. Yes, we have access to a lot more information, but I don't think we're better informed or better served by the volume of pictures that we have out there. And quality still continues to be a concern, and should be a concern to all of you if you are going to go into any form of work that entails photography or even content. I think we still have a lot to learn from the digital experience, and frankly, I hate to sound like an old man, but there used to be a lot better content in the past. Now, I'd like to open it up for questions, because I'm sure you would have some questions that you want to ask Gary or any other panelists.
What I'd like to add is, though, in conflict photography of today, images that are coming out, there's a photographer that comes to mind, Tyler Hicks from the New York Times. Had he not been where he was at the time that he took the photograph, the world wouldn't know a lot of the things that are going on, especially in the Middle East and places like that. So some of the photography that's being done today by photographers, by photojournalists, is truly, truly remarkable, because it does what a photograph is supposed to do. It informs us. It's a visual information means that we can then make opinion about what's going on in our lives, in our daily lives, and in our world. So yes, photojournalism today is very important. And it can be done just as easily with a single lens reflex digital camera as this. And in some cases, the images that I've taken with this are better than the Nikon that I have. So it's a matter of being there to be visual, to see and to record, and never stop, regardless of what you think. I've been taking pictures for 50 years, I haven't stopped. Gary, I've been living vicariously through his life for 50 years. He picked me up as a young man and got me my first job as a photographer, and I've been in close contact with him. So it's fraternal. All these photographers in this room, it's fraternal. Network now, because 50 years from now, you'll be telling stories like this and showing your images. So I ask everyone in this room who's a photographer, keep shooting.
Thank you, James. James Weber, great photographer.
There's a question back there.
Yes, hi Gary. So Gary and I were in the Weber lived together 79 to 81.
Wow.
And I was just, I did photography criticism. My question, isn't it really the editor? How is it in those years? Because I remember I wrote my story and then Gloria would choose the image that you did or whatever. So did you just send the pictures, whatever, and then it's the editor who really shapes it, wasn't it? Did you
That was
choose
the
image?
genius of Carlos and Gloria. They understood how to sell a newspaper. And in this new modern world, pictures were replacing text. When we had a story, Carlos would send out all five photographers to cover the same event. We'd have to be competing because he didn't consider the other newspapers competition. We were doing much better than the other 4 or 5 newspapers in town. Most Latin American cities have 4 or 5 newspapers, small circulation, but they. And so he would send us out, and we'd all bring our prints back, and he'd put them on a big table, and he'd work through them, and he'd come up with the front page, and he loved to use pictures. He loved put them page 2. It was a major story. You could have 5 pages of pictures. That's what made him different than most editors. I remember going into Las Vegas and covering a lot of boxing events, and the Las Vegas Review-Journal would let me develop my film there. And I'd look at their pictures on the fight that I was covering the next day, and they had 1 picture. Meanwhile, my paper would have 4 pages of pictures. And that's what sold the newspaper, especially in an island where not everybody reads. So you want to bring them in, but we had excellent circulation, and we were relevant to the population that we served.
And one other thing that I learned from Gloria, and she might have learned it from Carlos, that it has to be an action shot, because I was doing theater, because I'm have my own book now that's going to come out of all of those articles, and I'm choosing pictures, and I have her in my head, not a still of the cast, movement, right? When it's really moving.
We have to be flies on the wall. We really can't pose people. If you're posing people, you're not doing your job. You've got to wait there for moments to happen. If you get into a press conference, right? You get into a press conference and there's a bunch of people behind the table. Well, I try and shoot the pictures before the press conference starts, when they're talking to each other, so that you get something natural. So it's very important that you have a natural look to it. If you start posing pictures, you're not going to go far. You're not going to last long. You've got to understand. I always used to shoot for one person. I didn't shoot for the newspaper. I shot for Gloria, or I shot for Carlos, and that's it. I knew what they liked, and they always told me. Gloria never liked my wide-angle pictures. Never liked any of my wide. Too wide for fashion, because she was the woman's editor. So you develop a rapport with your editor. And if you have a good rapport with your editor and they're good at what they do, they will make your pictures sparkle. Yes, Rosa.
I'm of the idea that digital photography has improved photography to the sense that your pictures we get more of a variety of pictures, and you see purer pictures. You need to go to the essence because you have more photographs that take the pictures of the moment. And then when you get to the selection point, you have a photo editor that helps you shape the picture, and therefore photography is a
combination.
Right. It helps shape the story. So therefore, digital gives you more of a better product in the sense that you have more detail, more better photography, and the photographer doesn't have to worry about focus sometimes. And and lighting. It's almost all you in the back of the.
It's in the back of your head, you never think about it.
This is Rosso Sabalones. Gary's competition.
Yes.
He worked for it. He was one of the, they competed against each other. He worked for the San Juan Star
And the UPI.
and
UPI.
UPR.
He was my complete competition. He worked for the newspaper.
Exactly.
Where I started out as a copy boy. And he worked for UPI, so we were always together. We were best friends.
Exactly.
We've saved each other once in a while. I remember you come to me once and asked me for some frames or some pictures because you had
An error.
developed from, ran your black and white film from the developer straight,
They developed in Fixer.
in the fixer.
Somebody had mixed some chemicals up and they put the wrong chemical and it was a big story and I had 10 rolls of film and it all got developed in one tank. And boom, who do? I go to Rosso, I go to the El Mundo, I go to my friends, I say, hey, I don't want to lose my job. And they were all, and I would do it for them too. I did it for them many times. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Many of the pictures that you took, Harry, and I know Patrick has been as well, have been in really dangerous places. And, where shooting is going on, and, are you aware as photographers of what's going on around you? Are you more focused on what you're taking than the danger surrounding you?
It just depends. You're in Haiti and you're in the middle of, I remember one story that I had really early on. I went to Haiti to cover a soccer match. And we had security guards with the rifles. They used the M1 carbine and these young kids were carrying these things around and somehow one of the soldiers discharged a rifle into his foot. And this is before the game. And the other guys thought they were taking fire from the other side. And they started shooting. And the colonel stepped up and I'm trying to get pictures of this. But it was all too far apart. But you got to be aware of what's happening around you because you could get killed. You got to be careful and you don't want to get in the way.
But there is a great story from one of your mentors in photography. Mm-hmm. As Gary was saying earlier, there were practically more photographers and reporters at El Nuevo Dia. And Carlos would send out the whole gang for the same story sometimes. And there was a legendary photographer whose son is in the audience here today, Guayo Hernandez. And Guayo Hernandez went out to a UPR, the University of Puerto Rico riot, with Gary, or maybe you were.
I was on another assignment, kicking myself when I got back because I heard.
But with Luis Ramos, for sure.
Yes.
And Luis Ramos is a very good photographer who had the 3,000 Roberto Clemente hit photograph that went throughout the world and won many awards. And Luis was a very nice guy, but a little bit different in his upbringing. Obviously, when you compared him to Guayo, and they started shooting guns during the riots, and Luis started backing away, and Guayo would tell him, "No te asustes, mientras suenen la bala, no hay problema. Don't be afraid. As long as you hear the bullet, there's no problem." So, it's that's a very unique type of story because you're putting your life at risk. But if you have the vocation for this, you have to go out. You have to go out there and do it.
The vocation and the passion.
There's another question over here.
So when you're heading, like when you're on a plane or a helicopter to for an assignment when a tragic event happens, like a terrible hurricane or an earthquake, what's going through your mind to mentally prepare yourself for the devastating images you might see, and then what do you do afterwards help cope with these really horrifying images that you've seen and help show the world?
I use the camera as my shield. It's like, I put it in front of me, and it's a shield. I don't see, I mean, it doesn't affect me. I've never lost a night of sleep for anything that I've ever photographed. I've seen people killed in front of me, stoned to death, Walenda fell in front of me. It's just, it's a shield, because if you don't, you'll go crazy. You know, you can't, some of the stuff I've seen is very powerful, and you just have to be a professional, work the story, and keep working the story as long as you get, until you get the best pictures. That's what I'm always, the only thing that's going through my mind when I'm taking pictures of anything. I'm looking for the very best picture, the best angle, whatever it takes. I might have to shoot 2 or 3 rolls of pictures, or I might have to take 1 frame. It just depends on the story you're working on. But on the dangerous stuff, you use the camera. I use the camera as a shield. At least that's how I think of it.
Well, different people react differently. I must share with you the fact that I had to cover the same airplane crash in the Virgin Islands. We had to fly by helicopter with Carrasco from San Juan, and we had to fly back at night over water, which is something that you don't do on a helicopter. But that was not the most impressive thing that still remains in my mind. And I don't know, and I wish you don't have the experience of smelling burnt human flesh. But going into that scene in the Virgin Islands and smelling it was horrible. It was a horrible experience. I still remember it because I didn't have a camera to shield me.
I don't even remember you on the helicopter.
But I was there.
Okay, I believe it. But
Any more questions?
As a former professor, I'd be interested in all of you. How many of you are interested in photography? How many of you are, we have how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Why don't you ask them some questions? You have incredible people here.
how many want to be photojournalists? Anybody here want to be a photojournalist? 1. That's it.
2, 3,
3.
4, 5.
Okay.
Why?
It's the
That
best
is the
job in
question.
the world.
Ask the question, ask me to edit this. Do you, let's say Patrick sends you a photo, like 50 photos. Do you look at the photos first, or you know the story that you have, like, do you look at the pictures and then make up the story, or do you write the story and then shape the story to the picture that he had sent you? How do you go about making the story up to putting it together?
It's 2 different things. I was looking for the best photo. And then we will crop it. You know what crop it is?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm leaving out half of the picture. And because it doesn't go with the story.
Yeah.
So you have to blend, and sometimes one is more important than the other, but we were very visual, and we wanted the best picture, and the story is the second. Yeah.
So you take the photos, you look at the photographs, and then kind of go about it
When you open the paper, you see first the picture. And if you're interested enough, you read the headline, and then you start reading. But first is the picture.
Most of the time, to your question, the reporter would work with us, like Rissig did, and they do their own thing. They go back to sit on the type their story. I go back, I go to the dark room, and I do my pictures, and they both arrive at the same place on the same desk at the same time. So it's up to the editor to merge those two in a way that will be like Carlos wanted it. Lots of pictures, a little bit of text. Because pictures sell the newspaper.
Any more questions? Back there.
You guys spoke about in recent times there's been like a decrease in content quality because of digital photography. Do you feel like they'll go in a cycle and they'll one day return to?
It's not necessarily because of digital content. It is because what we have lost in the process is the whole editing cycle. We don't have editors anymore. When I started in journalism in 1970s, which is unfortunately last century, none of you were born then, but when I started in journalism then, we had 3 or 4 different levels of editors before it got to get printed. Today, we've lost that. So there's less critical analysis of what's going on or what's going into the publication. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not curated.
It's not curated.
It's not curated anymore. And I think there was also an apprenticeship kind of experience too, because for Pat and I, we came up through, you come up through like the regionals and in like the neighbors sections, and then there's senior photographers that you can learn from, and there's like you're saying, there's layers of editors. And I think even with social media, what I see is that it could really use a good editor.
Yes.
Editors are the way you grow. And so I'm pretty sure I've said this to my students, is that, if you really want to grow, is you need a mentor. We used to call them editors, and they were there and we were all working and getting paid. But now you have to seek it out yourself and find your own mentors is what I would suggest, because editing your own work is you're not necessarily going to pick your best work most of the time, and you're not going to get better because someone's not going to challenge you to get better. And I mean, that's what Carlos's legacy was that it challenged you to be your best self. Who challenges you to be your best self if you have no editor?
You tend to be less critical of your own work, but you need
more critical.
How did it work?
Sometimes too critical.
How did it work at the Herald? Did you come back to the dark room and do your own edit, and then you had an editor look at your film?
We had editors.
See, I didn't. I just came back. I would come back with the rolls and go and punch them, and then print them, and then I'd hand out 10, 12 pictures to Carlos. If it was a big story, if it was a small story, a couple pictures. But
depending on your shift.
One of the things that we learned, because I was an AP photographer, was that they only wanted one picture. They didn't want to pay for a bunch of pictures, so you learned to put all the story into one picture. Mm-hmm. And that was an editor's choice, But I was living to that way. I wouldn't do that for Carlos, but it would also work with Carlos too.
Another sin of the tabloid journalism was sensationalism. Gary got me a job on a newspaper, that's what they sold. They didn't have advertising, they sold sensationalism. They wanted blood and they wanted guts. And I became the celebrity when I would come into a crime situation or I come to an accident situation. The people knew that the falsetto photographer was there and they wanted to be part of the news. So it became sensationalist because people wanted to see the gore and the blood. And unfortunately, some of us at some point in our life come across that, and you have to be able to be well-equipped emotionally to be able to handle that and be reminded that it was a job. But the fact of the red tabloid in the day was sensationalism. I remember as a kid, the National Enquirer, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, was once a tabloid in black and white. And there was a photograph of someone standing on the New York City subway track holding the head of someone that had just been decapitated. Or as we say in Brooklyn, was just decaffeinated. And I was shocked that here's a photograph being printed of someone that had just lost their head. But that's what sold newspapers of that quote-unquote ilk. And there was no disclaimer. These photographs may be offensive, so take caution. Do not let little children read this paper. But it sold newspapers. And unfortunately, I don't think it was truly journalism. I think it was marketing sensationalism. That's been toned down quite a bit now, but it does happen.
Okay, any more questions?
I know how visual is easier to use and how...
Would you speak up a bit?
I can't hear you. I'm deaf.
I know how digital is easier to use and like way faster than the techniques, but I wonder if you ever think of going back to shooting on film sometimes.
So she knows digital is difficult to, or easier to use, but she was wondering if you're thinking about going back to film.
It helps to have younger panelists, Gary.
No. I was one of the first digital photographers in the world, and using digital cameras changed my life. It meant I could go out to a story and get out of a basketball game in 10 minutes. Because I could see what I had, and the quality at the beginning was awful. Now the quality is amazing. You can't get better quality on film than you can, not even on Kodachrome, which is the highest quality that we used to have. National Geographic would only shoot Kodachrome 25, because that was the best of the film, least grained, and it produced a very high dynamic range. So yeah, I don't see any reason to go back. I have friends of mine, professional photographers, they got their darkroom there, and they love to go and buy some rolls of film and take some pictures of some models or whatever they're doing, and then go in the darkroom and do it the old-fashioned way. That's not me, though. I'm a journalist, and the best way to be a journalist in today's market is speed and quality. And the speed you can't beat with a digital camera. Pat just said it. He was 5 minutes later sending the picture to the newspaper, probably made it in the press, on the internet 2 minutes after it got into the office. Am I right?
No, she lost it. They didn't use a picture of it.
There was nobody back at the office.
That happens.
I never saw the picture again. But I got a question for you.
Go ahead.
If you got an amazing body of work, the basketball picture, the picture inside the boxing ring, the balloons up in the air, and the balloons.
Louder?
I'm asking him about his body of work, and basically what I'm getting to is access. So I was wondering if you could tell us about access, and maybe tell us through the Walenda series how that access, because as students and even people that have been in the business a long time, access is one of the most important things to get, and then building these relationships once you have access to get these images. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about
Let me put the Walenda pictures up and we'll talk about it. All right.
Basically what happened with Carl Walenda, I was covering the feature, the circus, the night before he died. Sorry. And I was just shooting black and white pictures of, wait, I gotta figure this out. Up. Sorry. I don't use a Mac anymore. We'll just put this one up. Basically what I was doing, I was shooting feature pictures to fill up a feature page in the newspaper, and the ringmaster was an old friend of mine. He came up to me and he said, Carl Walenda would like to meet you, and I didn't know who Carl Walenda was. I'd been taking pictures of him in the circus for 3 or 4 years, or maybe 5 or 6 years at the time. Pan Am Circus came through town every year, and I would always like to do circus pictures. So I went back with Luis, and Luis Figueroa, who was a very famous TV personality. He was later killed by his wife. But anyway, I went back and he was talking to a young man. When he finished, he came to me and he said, well, the reason I asked Luis to come back, bring you back, was that I'm doing a walk between 2 hotels in the Condado tomorrow, and we want your newspaper to be there so we can fill up some seats in the circus. So it was strictly a commercial enterprise for the circus. And I said, well, I happen to live a half a block away. I'll be there. And I actually called my editor up in the morning, and I told him what was going on. And I said, listen, I'm not going to come to work today. I'm going to cover Walenda, and I'll be in the afternoon. I'm going to go to the beach with my son, who was a baby at the time. He's now 42. And I took my wife to the beach, and I was in the bathing suit, and I actually went by Walenda with the guide wires. See those guide wires? He was teaching people to lean into them. And I just drove by, went into the hotel, went to the beach. I didn't get any pictures of him doing the setup. I didn't do anything. I really made a big mistake. I mean, to me, that was a huge mistake. But anyway, I had one picture in mind. I wanted one picture.
And that was when he got close to me. I put a wide-angle lens on the roof on a chimney, and I was going to get up on this chimney and shoot him below me with the 5,000 or 6,000 people that were watching this. This was the picture that I was planning. So I'm on the beach, and I see him walking, and I go, oh, I'm going to miss this. So I go running, I get my car, the rest of my cameras out of the car. I go up to the roof, it's a 12-story building, and I get up there, and he's not there. And I said, oh my God, I missed it. And I said, his wife was there, and I said, what happened? And she said, oh, he was just testing out the wire. I said, okay. There was 2 TV crews there, another San Juan star photographer was there, people Corrales. And we started talking, and then he started walking across. And he got halfway across, and apparently, this isn't well known, but we did publish it in the newspaper a few weeks later. Apparently he had a heart attack. And if you look closely at his face, you'll see he's gritting his teeth. And by gritting his teeth, a cardiologist friend of mine called me up 2 weeks later and he said, you know, that's the face of a man having a heart attack. And I said, really? And then 2 weeks after, we did a story on it. We interviewed the doctor, and we ran the pictures again. And then I was at a dinner. Just by coincidence, I'm sitting next to the guy that was talking to Carl Wallenda in his dressing room. And he was a circus flyer, but he was working for the mayor of San Juan in the computer department. And we started talking about it, and I didn't know what Carl was doing, and he explained it to me, because he knew it pretty well. And he said that when he was talking to Carl, that Carl was complaining of chest pains. So that and by the way, they didn't do an autopsy on the man because everybody's going to die. And when the last picture in the sequence, I came downstairs and I had left my wide-angle lens on the chimney, and I'm down there with a 300-millimeter lens. And I can't shoot any pictures, so I had to go run upstairs, get my camera, come down again, and by that time this young lady had come out from the reception desk. She worked at the hotel and she was standing over, and they formed a cordon around him to keep the public out, and I took this picture. But it was my finger, I was using a motor drive with the 36 frames, and this picture here is the last picture, number 36. And as he fell away, there was a ledge, and I didn't see him hit. I heard it hit, but I didn't see him hit. So that was good from my point of view. But you know, you go to a story and you just never know what's going to happen. My finger just was on the button, and thank God it was bright daylight, and I had a large depth of field, and it took with a 300 millimeter all the way down, because I wasn't focusing. I don't think I was focusing. No. Did I answer the question?
How did you get access, and then how? Just talk about.
Well, I told you how I got the access because he invited me. Yeah. You know, and then most of the time access is pretty good. You walk in with 2 Nikons, and they know who you are. And you can get to the front of the row or wherever you need to be. Every now and then there was a large mudslide in Ponce, in the city. And I went out to the airport to try and get a helicopter, but the Air National Guard general was there, and he was going to take a whole bunch of people over. So in my broken Spanish, because my Spanish is not the best Spanish in the world, because I learned it when I was 20 years old, sitting in Carlos's office, listening to everything going on. And in my broken Spanish, I made an insult to the general. And everybody looked at me like, how could you say this to the general? He's not going to let you on. He let me on the helicopter, and I got over there, and other photographers from my staff had driven in, come in on other helicopters, but it's access, you know, and you do what it takes. You never know what it's going to take. You never know where you're going. You have a question?
In the transition between film to digital, when you're on site and you're filming, how do you think it's changed how you're operating the camera and setting up and the number of shots that you're taking?
Well, now you can shoot. I just go, I just burst the pictures, because it's film is cheap. You know, in the old days, film was expensive. We carry around bricks of 20
Do you think you were more
20
careful
rolls.
when you had film? And you said, well, I only got 12 shots left, and it's gonna, so were you more careful in your set, or now it's, plus
I would
things
say
are much more
we
automatic?
timed it differently. You know, especially if you're shooting a sporting event or something like
Yeah.
that, you're looking for peak action, you're looking for the ball to be in the picture, whatever. You know, there's certain rules about sports photography. You have to have the ball in the picture. If it's a ball game, if it's tennis, you gotta have the ball in the picture. Sometimes we used to cheat.
Film made you more judicious.
Getting back to what was said
You know,
earlier.
If you were, I'm
Sorry, didn't mean to step on.
No, that's okay. If you were, like, for instance, we were talking about sports, if you're shooting a tennis match, and it's like it's 5 games to 4, and, you get near the end, and you look at the back when you had film, and you look at it, and you're on, like, frame 30, and you go, okay, there's gonna be a celebration, or something, if Serena's been digital, but, Bjorn Borg is about to win, and you only have 6 frames left. Instead of finishing that roll off, you usually take it out and put a brand new roll in. Remember, you had to do a little bit of math, like, do I have enough here to get the celebration? And so you were more judicious when you had film. And I think you also, now you just blast away a little bit more. Candace kind of addressed it earlier, where you're you shimp a little bit, you get lazy.
Getting back to what was
Better
said
shots
earlier.
with film? You think you were more careful and you would do better shots with film than you
I don't think so. I think it's about the same because, you're a photographer, you're a professional. You shoot until you know you got it. Even with film, you don't know what you got. I'm shooting a basketball game. I got 30 minutes to shoot a back page and 4 picture pages inside. Okay, that's how we work. And we had a tight deadline because the paper was going to bed at 11 o'clock that night, and you had to be back at 8 o'clock and develop and print, and so you just did what you could, and you prayed. You just prayed, and if you're good, you're going to end up with that back page. You're going to end up with those 4 picture pages all the time. If you're not good, you're out of here.
Getting back to what was said earlier, if you've ever had the good fortune of looking at the contact sheets of the older photographers, the Cartier-Bressons and the Gene Smith, and they shot, they were very discreet, and they used discretion when they photographed, and they caught it in maybe 3 frames. I've just contact printed over 500 rolls of black and white pictures. Thank God for digital, because I've digitized a lot of these images. And I've blown 35 millimeter black and white negatives up to 20 inches by 30 inches. You could have never done that. Plus, cleaning a negative was almost impossible when you did 35. 4x5, you could play with the negative a little bit. But in the darkroom, you were limited. Adobe Photoshop, God bless whoever designed that program, because it made my life a lot easier if you ever had to spot photographs. But discretion was a better part of taking pictures. These photographers, Cartier-Bresson was of the school of the decisive moment. You see the bell curve. And that bingo he added, I was always before or after. And then contacting these 500 rolls of film, I asked myself, what was I shooting back then? How could I it was just, so there's always a learning curve, but intuition and timing is very important. And digital, the beauty of digital, I can't express to you how, I've been so passionate about photography all of my life. I get the same joy now at taking photographs as I did 50 years ago. But I can go out and shoot a lightning strike, and 2 minutes later I've got it up on the monitor and I'm playing with it in Adobe. This is just a world that's so exciting, and you guys are on the cutting edge of it. Also, dinosaurs had to, I went back to the School of Visual Arts just recently and come up to speed with digital, and I banged my head against the wall for many semesters trying to learn the tools of Adobe Photoshop. But I love it. And someone mentioned earlier, the key word, I think Lillian, key word was passion.
Yes.
You gotta fucking love it, man. If you don't, find some other kind of work.
You just got
It's gotta be a joy of your life.
That's a good way to end.
Yes.
No, it was in Spanish, don't worry.
I'm sorry. I'm taking after bed.
One last question, because I'm sure some of you want to go home.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, if you have a subject, like, you're taking photos of Ali, like, how do you create, like, a trusting, like, a safe space for, like, him to trust you to take photos?
Just kind of hang around with these people, and with Ali, I got to be friends because I was the guy that was assigned to his title fight in Puerto Rico. I was there every day for 3 weeks. I was the first photographer let in. You just build a rapport, you know, with these people, and he was an easy one to build a rapport with. He was just a nice guy, and he was very outgoing, and he gave of himself. One of the things about when I first met him, to give you an idea, he had cue cards on his, he was laying on the bed, and I'm going, Don, what am I going to do here? You know, he's laying on the bed. Well, I'm not going to get any pictures. And he's going through his cue cards. Well, we got up there. I can't remember who the reporter was. I think it was Ian, or I don't remember who the reporter was. But he's going through the cue cards. He floats like a butterfly, stings like a bee. He's going through this because he has a disease that's taking away his memory. So he's going. This is at the end of his career, right? And about 5 years later, I'm in Madison Square Garden at another fight. And it was Muhammad Ali Productions fight, the first one that he ever did with another promoter. They gave a hat to all the journalists, said Muhammad Ali Productions. And after I told you about getting thrown out of the room, right? And when I got to the Madison Square Garden 5 or 6 years later, he comes walking through and he's very slow and he's moving because he has Parkinson's disease and his motor skills are done. And I turned to him, I'm on the ring, and I said, Muhammad, would you please sign my hat? I never do this. I'm not allowed to do this in baseball. You never get autographs. You know, no matter how close you are to the people, you never get autographs. But I had this hat, and it said Muhammad Ali Productions. I wasn't going to pass it up. He turned to me and he said, yes, Gary. And he remembered who I was, and that showed me that he was still all there. So, yeah, that's a little sidebar on Muhammad Ali.
I just want to thank you for all the patience you've shown. I want to thank our panelists, Candace and Patrick, and of course, El Maestro Williams. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.